I was keeping vigil in the pediatric intensive care unit, perched on a chair made of unforgiving, chilly blue plastic. My hand was curled around my daughter's. Her name is Sophie. She's 7, and her hand felt impossibly delicate and cool inside of mine. A network of tubes and wires crisscrossed her small body, with a thin white blanket drawn up to her chest. The machine beside her bed was breathing for her. That sound, a soft mechanical whoosh, a gentle inflation of air that was supposed to be a comfort, only served as a constant reminder that her own small lungs had stopped working. Before we get into the heart of this, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from around the world. The beeping was a constant, unnerving symphony, a steady, low-frequency pulse from one monitor, a higher, more insistent chirp from another. In the last few hours, I had become fluent in this terrifying language. I knew which beep signaled a stable heartbeat and which one meant a nurse had to come sprinting. For now, the sounds were steady and gut-wrenching. Just hours ago, a pickup truck had barreled through a red light. I can still see its color, a faded, dusty red. It was the last thing I registered before my world imploded in a storm of shattering glass and tortured metal. We were on our way to the park. Sophie was in the back, belting out a song about a magical squirrel, her voice slightly off-key and utterly perfect. Now she was here. My little spark, my singer, my entire universe, lying motionless in a hospital bed with a white bandage wrapped around her head. Her face was ashen, save for a dark, ugly bruise blooming across her right cheek. I gently traced the line of her eyebrow with my thumb, terrified of touching the bruised skin. I just needed her to feel my presence. I hoped my touch could somehow seep into her and tell her to keep fighting. My own body was a map of pain. I was fairly certain I had broken ribs. A doctor had briefly mentioned a concussion, but I had refused to leave her bedside. I couldn't. Every fiber of my being was focused on the shallow, fragile movement of her chest beneath that thin hospital blanket. That's when my phone vibrated. It was lying screen down on the small side table. I almost didn't touch it. What could possibly be important? But a small, foolish part of me, the part conditioned by 35 years of ingrained duty, thought it might be family. Perhaps it was my sister Jessica with an update. Maybe my dad was checking on us. I reached for it. The screen flared to life, painfully bright in the dim ICU room. It was a text message from my mother. My breath caught in my throat. For just a split second, a flicker of stupid hope. She was worried. She was thinking about Sophie. Then I read the message. Don't forget Chloe's party tomorrow. You need to bring the vanilla cupcakes. I stared at the glowing screen. My brain couldn't process the words. It couldn't connect them to the sterile, terrifying reality of this room. Cupcakes, a party, tomorrow. It was like a transmission from another dimension, a different lifetime. Chloe was my niece, Jessica's daughter. Her birthday was this weekend. I was supposed to be making her favorite cupcakes. I had promised. I must be misunderstanding. Maybe she didn't grasp the severity of what happened. I had called my dad from the chaos of the emergency room. My voice was shaking so violently I could barely form words. I told him there'd been a crash. I told him Sophie was hurt. Critically, he must have told her. My fingers felt numb and clumsy as I tried to type a reply. Sophie is in the ICU. But before my finger could hit send, another message buzzed. It was my mother again. Clara, don't you ignore me. You have a tendency to make everything about you. You made a promise to Chloe. The air was stolen from my lungs in a silent, painful gasp. The plastic chair suddenly felt like it was miles away from the floor, making everything about me. My daughter was connected to a ventilator, and my mother was accusing me of seeking attention. The cruelty of it was so precise, so sharp, it felt like a physical blow, a clean, cold incision straight through my heart. Another vibration, this one from a family group chat. My dad's name appeared. My heart lurched again, praying he would be the voice of sanity, praying he would fix this impossible hurt. His message appeared right below my mother's. Your mother has a point. Your sister's daughter is important too. Stop making such a scene and just reply to her. Your theatrics always spoil everything. Spoil things. Theatrics. The words blurred in front of my watery eyes. The beeping from the machine seemed to melt into a dull, distant roar. I looked from the phone in my hand to my daughter's still, pale face. Her small, perfect lips were slightly agape. A clear tube was taped to the corner of her mouth. I thought of all the years I had swallowed my own feelings just to keep the peace. All the times I had apologized for things that weren't my fault. All the times I had driven across the city, baked the desserts, planned the gatherings, and watched the children, hoping that one day my relentless effort would be acknowledged, that one day I would be acknowledged. And in that sterile, quiet room, with the biting scent of antiseptic in the air and my child's life hanging by a fragile thread, I finally understood the truth. They would never see me. They couldn't. Because to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a function, a utility. And in that moment, I was a broken one. That was the instant it happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a scream. It was a quiet, cold fracture deep in my soul. The part of me that had spent a lifetime yearning for their love, their approval, their most basic human decency, finally fell silent. It didn't die in a blaze of glory. It just let go. It broke. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very core, that it would never, ever be pieced back together again. To really grasp that moment in the hospital, you have to understand my family, the Harrison family. From the outside, we looked like a portrait of perfection. We were the family on the holiday cards, all smiling in coordinated outfits. My mother made sure of that. Helen Harrison, my mother, was a curator of appearances. Her house was a spotless museum. Her garden was without a single weed, and her feelings were always neatly folded and tucked away behind a polite, strained smile. She didn't raise daughters. She managed them. Everything was about how things appeared to the neighbors, to her social circle, to the world. In our house, love wasn't a feeling. It was a performance, and I was always a terrible actor. My father, Robert Harrison, was her primary audience. He was a quiet man who had discovered early in life that the path of least resistance was simply to agree with my mother. He wasn't overtly cruel. He was just absent, a ghost at his own family dinners. Whenever my mother would direct a sharp, critical remark my way, he would simply find something fascinating at the bottom of his dinner plate. His silence was his consent. He saw what was happening. He had to. But he consistently chose tranquility over protection. He chose his wife over his daughter every single time. And then there was Jessica, my older sister. Jessica was born for the spotlight. She was the golden child, the one who never made a mistake. She was beautiful, charismatic, and had mastered my mother's game. When Jessica got a C on a test, my mother would insist the teacher must have a personal vendetta against her. When I got a B, my mother would demand to know why it wasn't an A. When Jessica wrecked her first car, my parents co-signed a loan for a new one. When I got a flat tire, my dad told me to Google how to change it. Jessica quickly learned to see me just as my mother did, as the help. as the person who existed to make her life run more smoothly. My entire life, I was the fixer. It was my unspoken official role. When my mother decided to host a last-minute dinner party for 30 people, I was the one who got the call to come over immediately to chop vegetables and polish the silver. When Jessica needed a babysitter for Chloe so she could have a weekend getaway with her husband, she didn't ask. She just told me what time I needed to be there. When my dad's car needed its annual inspection, I was the one expected to take a day off work to wait at the dealership for him. I did it all, every single time. I did it because I was chasing a phantom. I was chasing the hope that if I was helpful enough, if I was good enough, if I never once said no, then one day they would finally turn to me and say, "Thank you, Clara. We see you. We love you." I remember one of Chloe's birthdays a few years back. I spent 2 whole days planning a massive backyard party. My sister had been complaining about how stressed she was, so I volunteered to handle everything. I wanted to give her that gift. I rented a bouncy castle, I baked a 3-tiered cake, I organized games. When the guests arrived, all the parents from Chloe's private school, they all gushed over the decorations and the food. I was in the kitchen, my apron still stained with frosting, and I heard my sister's clear, bright voice say, "Oh, thank you." I was up all night getting everything ready. It's been exhausting. She didn't so much as glance in my direction. Later, while I was scrubbing a mountain of sticky plates, my mother came in and dropped a fork in the sink. "You missed a spot on this one," she said, before turning and walking out. I just stood there, my hands submerged in the greasy water, and cried without making a sound. I didn't want them to hear me. I didn't want to cause any drama. That was the recurring pattern. My needs were always an inconvenience. My feelings were always drama. My exhaustion was just an excuse. I was the family's designated shock absorber. I was the one who was meant to soak up all the pressure, all the demands, all the cold indifference, and smile right through it. I was expected to be perpetually available, but emotionally non-existent. I spent years thinking it was my fault. I thought if I just tried harder, found the perfect words, or performed the right actions, the dynamic would shift. I would finally earn my place. I would finally matter. Sitting in that ICU, the phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand, I saw the unvarnished truth. It was never about me trying harder. It was about them needing someone to be small so they could feel big. They needed a servant, not a daughter. They needed a fixer, not a family member. And as I looked at my own daughter, my beautiful, innocent Sophie, lying broken in that bed because of a stranger's recklessness, I realized the most dangerous people in her life weren't strangers at all. They were the ones who were supposed to love her most. The ones who, in the face of our greatest tragedy, were worried about cupcakes. They hadn't just failed me. They were a potential threat to my child, because they had trained me for my entire life to put their needs before my own. And if I wasn't careful, they would teach me to put their needs before hers, too. It was supposed to be a simple trip to the park. That's the detail that haunts me, the sheer, boring normalcy of it all. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was unseasonably warm for autumn, streaming through the windshield and illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. We were headed to the park for a picnic. Sophie was buckled into her booster seat in the back, singing along to some pop song on the radio. She was in a phase where she just made up her own lyrics. The song was about a breakup, but Sophie's version was about a raccoon who wanted to be an astronaut. She was singing at the top of her lungs, kicking her little legs in their purple sneakers against the back of my seat. I caught her eye in the rearview mirror, and she flashed me a huge, gap-toothed smile. "The raccoon needs a spaceship, Mommy," she sang, her voice filled with mock urgency. Oh no, I said, playing along. How will he build one? With magical cookies, she declared. I laughed. In her world, everything could be fixed with a magical cookie. For that single, perfect moment, everything was right. The sound of her laughter, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the familiar streets of our neighborhood. It was just a simple, happy moment, the kind you don't even register until it's been stolen from you forever. We were stopped at a red light, just 3 blocks from the park. I was humming along with the radio. I remember noticing the man in the car next to us, yelling into his phone. I remember the crosswalk sign flashing its little white walking person symbol. Everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. Then the light turned green. I took my foot off the brake and began to ease into the intersection. It all happened in slow motion, yet it was over in less than a second. To my left, I saw a flash of dusty red. A huge pickup truck, the kind with a massive front grille that looks like a snarling set of teeth. It wasn't slowing down. It wasn't even attempting to. It was a missile, and it was aimed directly at us. There was no time to scream. There was no time to think. My only instinct was a useless, futile jerk of the steering wheel, trying to move Sophie away from the point of impact. My body went rigid. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Then, the sound. It's a sound you can't truly describe. It's not just a crash. It's a fundamental violation. It's the sound of metal being shredded like tissue paper. It's the explosion of glass disintegrating into a million tiny, glittering fragments. It's the violent, gut-wrenching thud of 2 tons of steel colliding with 1 ton of steel. The world spun. My head slammed hard against the window. For a second, there was only a searing, bright white light and a deafening roar in my ears. The car was shoved sideways, scraping across the asphalt with a horrifying screech. It felt like we were tumbling end over end, but we were just spinning. Then, silence. A thick, heavy silence that was even more terrifying than the noise. It lasted for only a heartbeat. Smoke began to fill the car, smelling of burnt plastic and something acrid and sweet, like antifreeze. My ears were ringing. My vision was blurry. The world was tilted at a bizarre angle. The driver's side of the car was completely crushed inward. The door was pressed hard against my body. Pain started to filter in, a sharp, stabbing agony in my side, a dull, throbbing ache in my head. But none of that mattered. "Sophie?" I choked out. My voice was a raw, broken whisper. There was no answer. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the fog in my brain. I couldn't turn around. My body was pinned. I reached my arm back, my fingers fumbling blindly toward the back seat. "Sophie, baby, can you hear me?" I sobbed, my voice cracking. "Say something. Please, say something." My fingers brushed against her leg. It was completely still. I stretched further, my shoulders screaming in protest, until my hand found hers. It was limp, so terrifyingly limp. That's when the sirens started. Faint at first, then growing louder and louder, a piercing wail that seemed to be coming from inside my own skull. Flashing lights, red and blue, painted the interior of the car, making the smoke and dust dance in the air. People were shouting outside. A face appeared in the shattered passenger side window. A woman's mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear her words. All I could feel was Sophie's limp hand in mine. All I could see was her deafening silence. They had to cut me out of the car. I remember the shriek of the jaws of life, the firefighters yelling instructions. I wouldn't let go of her hand. A paramedic leaned in and spoke to me, his voice calm and steady in the middle of the chaos. He told me they were getting her out. He told me she was breathing. I clung to those words, "She's breathing." The rest is a blur. The ambulance ride, the hospital, doctors and nurses swarming around us, questions I couldn't answer, forms I couldn't sign. And through it all, I kept asking the same thing, over and over to anyone who would listen. Is my daughter okay? Please, is my daughter okay? And no one would give me a straight answer. They just looked at me with that awful pity in their eyes. Now she was here, in this quiet, dimly lit room, fighting for her life. And my family, my own mother and father, were asking for baked goods. They were taking that perfect, simple moment in the car, the sunlight, the laughter, the song about a raccoon astronaut, and they were trampling all over its memory with their selfish, thoughtless demands. They were trying to erase it, just like they had tried to erase me for my entire life. I must have been sitting in that plastic chair for 6 hours straight. My body had gone from aching to numb. A kind nurse had tried to coax me to go to the emergency room for myself, to get my ribs x-rayed. But I refused. I couldn't leave Sophie. What if she woke up and I wasn't here? The thought was unbearable. So I sat, and I watched, and I prayed. A young doctor with kind eyes and a weary face came in to check on Sophie. He gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We're monitoring the pressure in her brain," he said softly. "The next 24 hours are critical. You should really try to get some rest." Rest felt like a betrayal. How could I rest when she couldn't? He continued, "I just spoke with the front desk. They said your mother is in the waiting area. Should I send her back?" My mother. She was here. For one stupid, hopeful second, my heart leapt. The texts, the cruelty. It must have been a terrible mistake, a misunderstanding. My dad must have downplayed the accident, and she didn't realize how bad it was. But now she was here. She had driven all this way to the hospital. She was here to be a mother. She would walk through that door, her face etched with worry, and she would wrap her arms around me, and we would face this together. She would hold my hand the way I was holding Sophie's. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Please, send her in." The doctor nodded and left, the door swinging shut with a soft whoosh. I braced myself. I tried to smooth my hair, which was matted with dried blood on one side. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. I wanted to look strong for her. I waited. Every second felt like an eternity. I listened for her footsteps, for the sound of the door. Finally, it opened, and there she was, Helen Harrison. She stood in the doorway, her handbag perched flawlessly in the crook of her arm. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, not a single silver strand out of place. She was wearing a crisp cream-colored blouse with a pearl brooch pinned to the collar, gleaming under the harsh hospital lights. Her face, her perfectly made-up face, showed no signs of distress. No worry, no fear, not a trace of emotion at all. She looked like she was stopping by after a luncheon at her book club. She didn't look at Sophie. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the machines and the IV bags with a look of faint distaste, as if she had just walked into a poorly maintained hotel room. Then her gaze landed on me and her eyes narrowed. The first words out of her mouth were not, "How is she?" They were not, "How are you?" They were not, "I was so worried." Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Did you get my text?" she said. The flicker of hope inside me died instantly, snuffed out by the cold draft of her words. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, my mind reeling. She was standing 10 feet away from her critically injured grandchild, and she was talking about a text message, about cupcakes. "Mom," I finally managed to whisper. The word felt like ash in my mouth. "Sophie's on life support." I said it quietly, hoping the words themselves would shock her into reality, hoping they would crack through that polished exterior and find a grandmother, a mother somewhere inside. They didn't. Her lips thinned into a hard, flat line. "And your niece still needs her cupcakes for her party. It's her birthday. Don't be so selfish and make this about you. Make this about you." The phrase echoed in my head, the same words from her text message now delivered in person. The sheer absurdity of it was so profound I almost laughed. A wild, hysterical sound bubbled up in my throat, but I choked it down. Before I could even process her cruelty, another figure appeared in the doorway behind her. My sister, Jessica. She was on her phone, typing something with her thumb. She glanced up, saw me, and rolled her eyes. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, it was like a physical slap. "There you are," Jessica said, her tone dripping with annoyance. She finally looked over at Sophie's bed, a brief, uninterested glance. "God, Clara, you're overreacting. Kids get banged up all the time. She'll be fine." She turned her attention back to me. "But Chloe's birthday is important. I told all the moms at her school that you were making your famous vanilla cupcakes. You can't back out now. It would be really embarrassing for me. Embarrassing for her." I looked from my sister's bored, entitled face to my mother's cold, impatient one. They weren't seeing the same room I was. They weren't seeing the ventilator, the monitors, the tube taped to my daughter's bruised face. They weren't seeing a little girl fighting for her life. They were seeing an inconvenience, an obstacle. They were seeing their personal fixer, their family servant, failing at her duties, and it was annoying them. My tragedy was an unscheduled disruption to their day. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of absolute certainty. The calm that comes after the last ember of hope has been extinguished. I finally understood. There was nothing I could do, nothing I could say that would ever make them care. It wasn't possible. They were broken in a way I could never, ever fix. I looked at my mother's pearl brooch. It caught the light and sent a tiny, sharp glint across the room. I thought about the years. All the years I had spent desperately trying to earn a crumb of affection from this woman. The holidays I had ruined for myself by trying to make them perfect for her. The phone calls where I listened to her complain about Jessica for an hour, only to hear her praise Jessica to everyone else. The endless, thankless tasks I performed, always hoping this one, this time, would be the one that made her see me. I thought about my sister. I thought about the secrets I had kept for her, the money I had lent her, the times I had picked up her child from daycare because she forgot. All of it done in the name of being a good sister, a good aunt. All of it a complete waste. All of those years of quiet endurance, of biting my tongue, of swallowing my pain, came rushing up inside me. It was a tidal wave of resentment and hurt, and it was about to break. It all snapped in a single indrawn breath. My hands started to tremble, not from weakness, but from a surge of pure, cold rage I had never allowed myself to feel before. I slowly, deliberately stood up from the plastic chair. My legs were shaky, but I locked my knees. I felt taller. "You want cupcakes," I said. My voice was low and quivering. It sounded like a stranger's voice. "You are standing in the intensive care unit. You are looking at my daughter, your granddaughter, and you want me to go home and bake cupcakes." My mother's face twisted into a mask of indignation. "Stop exaggerating, Clara. Nobody is asking you to do it this second. But you need to have a sense of responsibility to the rest of the family." Responsibility? The word came out louder now, sharper. The nurse at the station down the hall glanced in our direction. "You want to talk to me about responsibility? While my daughter's heart is being kept alive by a machine?" "There you go again," Jessica sighed, stepping forward. "So dramatic. This is why no one can ever talk to you. You always have to be the victim." The victim, that was it. That was the word that turned everything inside me from trembling rage to solid steel. For my entire life, they had painted me as the dramatic one, the overly sensitive one, the one who made things difficult. They had even made me believe it myself. I spent my whole life apologizing for having feelings. Not anymore. I took a step toward them. My voice dropped again, but this time there was no tremble. It was flat. It was dead. It was the voice of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Get out. My mother blinked, genuinely shocked. What did you just say to me? I said. Get out, I repeated, my eyes locked on hers. Get out of this room. You can't talk to me that way, she hissed, her face flushing red. I am your mother. A bitter, harsh laugh escaped my lips. My mother would be worried about cupcakes for a party. My mother would be calling me selfish while my child might be dying. You are not my mother. You are just the woman who gave birth to me. I turned my gaze to Jessica, whose mouth was hanging open. And you? You're worried about being embarrassed? You should be. You should be embarrassed to be such a shallow, heartless human being. Chloe deserves a better mother than you. The shock on their faces was a sight to behold. It was the look of someone who has kicked a dog every day of its life and is suddenly, inexplicably bitten. They were speechless. They had no script for this. The Clara they knew didn't fight back. The Clara they knew would have eventually caved, apologized, and promised to get the cupcakes done somehow. That Clara was gone. She died the moment I read those text messages. I stood my ground, my entire body humming with a strange, powerful energy. I am done, I said, my voice ringing with a finality that echoed in the small, quiet room. I am not your servant. I am not your backup mother. I am not your emotional punching bag. I am Sophie's mom, and from now on, she is the only one who matters. She comes first. Their faces were a mixture of disbelief and fury, but they didn't say another word. They just stared at me as if I were a complete stranger, and I suppose I was. I didn't wait for them to leave. I simply turned my back on them. I walked back to Sophie's bedside, picked up her small, warm hand, and held it to my cheek. I didn't need to see them go. I could hear it, the sound of my mother's indignant scoff, the sound of Jessica whispering something venomous, and then the sound of their heels clicking angrily on the polished hospital tile as they walked away. That sound, the sound of them leaving my life, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It echoed down the hallway like the sound of freedom. After they were gone, the silence they left behind was vast and heavy. The air in the room, which had been crackling with their toxic energy, slowly settled. The only sounds were the steady, rhythmic puff of the ventilator and the soft electronic pulse of Sophie's heart monitor. For a moment, I just stood there, my back to the door, my hand resting on my daughter's bed. The adrenaline that had flooded my body, giving me the strength to finally stand up to them, began to drain away, leaving me feeling hollowed out and shaky. I sank back into the cold plastic chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my bruised ribs. What did I just do? The question echoed in the new, terrifying silence. For 35 years, I had navigated my life by a single unwavering rule. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. Don't upset Mom. Don't disappoint Dad. Don't burden Jessica. My entire identity was built around their comfort and my compliance, and I had just set fire to all of it. That's when my phone, which I had dropped on the chair, began to buzz, and it didn't stop. It was a relentless, angry vibration against the plastic, a machine gun burst of notifications, each one a digital bullet aimed at the fragile new person I was trying to become. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it would be poison, but a part of me, the part that was still their trained daughter, felt compelled to look. The screen was a wall of their rage. It started with my mother. "How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I have done for you. You are an ungrateful, selfish child, and you have broken my heart." Another one followed instantly. "Your father is devastated. You have finally pushed us away for good with your disgusting behavior. I hope you're happy being all alone." Then Jessica's texts began. They were crueler, sharper. "You're a psycho. Seriously, kicking us out when we came to support you? You're unbelievable. Have fun with your little drama scene. Don't call me when you need something, ever again. Chloe is heartbroken that you're ruining her birthday." The words were designed to hit every insecurity I had. Ungrateful, selfish, alone, psycho, drama. They were the labels they had branded me with my entire life, and they were pressing them into my skin with all their might, trying to force me back into my box. Then came the message that truly broke me. It was from my father, my quiet, passive father who never took a side, whose silence had always been a quiet confirmation of my mother's cruelty. For the first time, he wasn't silent. He had picked up his phone and typed out the words himself. "Clara, your mother is in tears. You need to apologize for the things you said. This isn't like you. Do the right thing. Do the right thing." The right thing, for him, was for me to swallow my pain, ignore their heartlessness, and smooth things over for my mother. The right thing was to go back to being their servant. Even now, with his granddaughter on life support, his primary concern was his wife's feelings, not my pain, not Sophie's life. I stared at his message, and the last, stubborn thread of hope that he might one day stand up for me finally disintegrated. He wasn't a victim of my mother's personality. He was her partner in it. He was the one who held me down while she hit me. I looked at Sophie. Her small face was so peaceful, so innocent. She was completely dependent on me, not just for her physical survival in this hospital, but for her emotional survival in the world. What would happen to her if I let these people back into our lives? They would do to her what they had done to me. They would teach her that her feelings were an inconvenience. They would teach her that love was conditional. They would teach her to be small, a new kind of strength, cold and clear, washed over me. It wasn't the fiery rage from before. It was a quiet, unshakable resolve. Without hesitation, I opened my contacts. My thumb hovered over the first name, Helen Harrison. I could feel 35 years of conditioning screaming at me not to do it. "She's your mother. You can't just cut her out. Families are forever." I thought of the cupcakes. I thought of the pearl brooch. I thought of the words, "Don't make this about you." I pressed the button. "Block this caller." A small confirmation popped up. I pressed block contact. Her name vanished from my recent texts, replaced by a generic number. It was like she had been erased. Next, I found my father, Robert Harrison. My hand hesitated for a second. He was my dad. He had taught me how to ride a bike. He had held my hand at the zoo. But that man was a ghost. The man who existed now was the one who told me to apologize for being hurt. I thought of his silence, the thousands of times he had looked away. I pressed block contact. Finally, Jessica, my golden sister, the one I had both admired and resented my whole life. I thought of her eye roll. I thought of her sigh of annoyance. I thought of the phrase, "Kids get banged up all the time." My thumb didn't even pause. Block contact. And then silence. The phone in my hand stopped buzzing. The screen went dark. The barrage was over. The silence that filled the room now was different. It wasn't empty or scary. It was calm. It was clean. It felt holy. I placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't need it anymore. There was no one I needed to hear from. The only person who mattered was in the bed in front of me. Tears finally started to stream down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of relief, of release. I felt like I had been carrying a 100-pound weight on my back my entire life, and I had just let it fall to the ground. I was lighter. I leaned over Sophie's bed, my tears dripping onto the white hospital blanket. I stroked her soft blonde hair back from her forehead. "It's just us now, baby," I whispered, my voice thick but steady. "Just you and me. I choose you. I choose us." And for the first time in my entire life, standing up for myself didn't feel like I was starting a war. It felt like I was finally finding peace. The hours after I blocked my family passed in a strange, timeless blur. The world shrank to the four walls of the ICU room, to the rise and fall of Sophie's chest and the rhythmic beeping of the machines. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I just sat holding her hand, watching. I felt strangely calm, suspended in a bubble of quiet purpose. My only job was to be here. Everything else had fallen away. Sometime in the deep middle of the night, the door opened softly. A nurse I hadn't seen before came in. She was a little older than me, with dark, curly hair pulled back in a loose bun, and the kindest eyes I had ever seen. Her name tag read Diane Miller, RN. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was comforting, her footsteps barely making a sound on the tiled floor. She smiled gently at me before turning her attention to Sophie. She checked the IV drip, read the numbers on the monitors, and made a few notes on a chart. Her hands were deft and sure, but there was a softness to her movements, a reverence in the way she adjusted Sophie's blanket. She wasn't just treating a patient, she was caring for a child. When she finished her checks, she didn't just leave. She walked over to my chair and stood beside me for a moment, looking down at Sophie. "She's holding steady," she said, her voice a low, soothing murmur. "Her vitals have been stable all shift. She's a strong little girl." Her words were a balm. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Diane then looked at me, really looked at me. Her gaze was soft, but it saw everything: the dried blood in my hair, the dark circles under my eyes, the tremor in my hands. "Have you had any water?" she asked. "Or eaten anything?" I shook my head. "I'm not hungry. You need to take care of yourself to be able to take care of her," she said gently. She left the room for a moment and came back with a small bottle of water and a packet of crackers. She placed them on the table next to me. "Just try to have a little." For her, it was such a small gesture. A bottle of water, some crackers. But the simple, unconditional kindness of it broke through the wall I had built around myself. A ragged sob escaped my lips before I could stop it. The tears I had been holding back for hours came rushing out. I was so embarrassed. I tried to stifle the sound, turning my head away. "I'm sorry," I choked out. Diane pulled a chair over from the corner and sat down next to me. She didn't say, "Don't cry," or "It will be okay." She just sat there, a quiet, steady presence in the dark, and let me cry. She gave me the gift of her patience. When my sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she spoke again, her voice still soft. "You've been through a terrible trauma. All of this," she gestured around the room. "It's a lot for anyone to handle." I don't know why I told her. Maybe it was her kindness. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was because I just had to say it out loud to someone to make it real. It's not just the accident, I whispered, the words tumbling out. My family. They were here earlier. My mom. She saw Sophie like this, with all these machines, and she asked me to bring cupcakes to my niece's party tomorrow. I said it, and the words sounded even more insane than they had in my head. I expected her to look confused, to think I was exaggerating or had misunderstood, but she didn't. Nurse Diane Miller looked at me, and her kind eyes filled with a quiet, profound sorrow. There was no shock on her face, only recognition. It was a look that said, I have heard stories like this before. I believe you. She reached out and gently touched my shoulder. Her touch was warm and grounding. They trained you to believe love means sacrifice, she said, her voice full of a wisdom that went far beyond medicine. They taught you that your only value is in what you can do for them, that to be a good daughter, a good sister, you had to erase yourself. I stared at her, my breath catching in my chest. She was putting words to feelings I hadn't even known I had. She continued, her gaze unwavering. But that isn't love, Clara. That's use. Real love, the love a parent should have for a child, the love you have for your little girl right there. It isn't about sacrifice. It's about protection. Protection. The word landed deep inside me. It felt like a key turning in a lock I never knew existed. I had just blocked my family, and I had felt a surge of guilt, a lifetime of conditioning telling me I had done something wrong, something unnatural. But Diane's words reframed it. I wasn't destroying my family. I was protecting my child. I was protecting myself. I was doing the one thing my parents had never, ever done for me. I was choosing protection over performance. How did you know? I whispered. She gave my shoulder a final, gentle squeeze. I've been a nurse for 20 years. I've learned that the worst wounds are often the ones you can't see. She stood up and took the empty water bottle. You get some rest. I'll be right outside if you need anything at all. She left, and the room was quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a newfound clarity. For the first time, someone had seen my reality and validated it. A stranger, a nurse in the middle of the night, had seen me more clearly than my own family had in a lifetime. She hadn't called me dramatic. She hadn't called me selfish. She had called me a mother, and she had told me I was doing the right thing. The first light of dawn was just beginning to creep through the window, turning the dark sky to a soft, bruised purple, when another stranger entered my small world. This woman was dressed not in scrubs, but in a professional blouse and slacks. She had a kind but serious face and carried a clipboard. "Clara Harrison?" she asked softly. I nodded. "My name is Miss Peterson. I'm a hospital social worker. Do you mind if I talk with you for a moment?" My heart seized with a familiar dread. A social worker? My mind immediately jumped to the worst conclusions. Was there a problem? Were they questioning my ability to care for Sophie? It was the kind of fear my family had instilled in me, that if I didn't perform perfectly, everything could be taken away. I gestured to the chair Diane had used. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Everything is fine with your daughter's care," she reassured me quickly. "This is about something else. I was called down here because, well, your parents and your sister are in the main lobby. They're demanding to see Sophie." I felt a cold dread wash over me, followed instantly by the hot steel of my newfound resolve. Of course they were. They had been blocked, so they had escalated. They had lost their digital access to me, so now they were here in person, trying to use force and authority to regain control. They were probably putting on a masterful performance for the front desk staff, the worried grandparents, the concerned aunt, being kept from their precious sick child by the unstable mother. "They're causing quite a scene," Ms. Peterson continued, her expression careful and neutral. "They're insisting it's their right as family to be here. Hospital policy in the ICU is strict, but in these situations, we try to defer to the primary caregiver's wishes. So, I need to ask you, do you want them to come back?" The old Clara would have agonized over this. She would have weighed their anger against the potential for a fight. She would have worried about how it looked to the hospital staff. She would have probably given in, just to make the problem go away, and then paid the price for it emotionally for weeks. But the old Clara was gone. I didn't even hesitate. My voice was quiet, but perfectly firm. "Number." Miss Peterson watched me, her pen poised over her clipboard. "No, you don't want them here right now, or—" "No," I repeated, cutting her off gently but with absolute finality. "They are not allowed near her, not now, not ever. They are not to be given any information about her condition. They are not her family anymore." The words felt powerful in my mouth. I was drawing a line, not in the sand, but in solid rock. The social worker's professional demeanor remained, but I could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe sympathy. She had to follow procedure. "Okay?" she said slowly, making a note. "For our records, this is considered a formal restriction. May I ask why you're making this request?" A brief reason is usually required if they try to contest it. I met her gaze directly. I didn't need to shout or cry. I didn't need to list the 35 years of neglect and emotional abuse. I just needed to give her the one perfect, undeniable truth of the past 24 hours. Because they wanted me to bake cupcakes while she was on life support. I said it plainly, without embellishment. The words hung in the air between us, stark and horrifying in their simplicity. Ms. Peterson's face crumpled. The mask of professional neutrality dissolved, replaced by a look of pure human shock and empathy. Her mouth parted slightly. She stopped writing. She just stared at me, and I could see the truth of my statement landing on her with its full, brutal weight. She saw it. She understood. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was no longer that of a hospital employee. It was the voice of a woman speaking to another woman. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Okay, Clara. That's all I need to know." She scribbled a quick note on her clipboard, something I knew was a formal documentation of my wishes. Then she looked back up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You don't owe them anything," she whispered, leaning forward slightly. "Not access, not an explanation, not another minute of your time. You don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them a thing." Hearing those words from a stranger in a position of authority, a person whose job it was to assess family situations, felt like a pardon. It was the official stamp of approval on the decision I had made in the dark of the night. Diane, the nurse, had validated my heart. Ms. Peterson, the social worker, was validating my boundary. "I know," I said, and a tear I didn't know was there rolled down my cheek, but I really, really needed someone else to say it. She gave me a small, sad smile and stood up. "I'll go handle it. I will make it very clear to security that they are not to be allowed on this floor. You won't be disturbed by them again." She walked to the door and paused, her hand on the handle. "You're a good mom," she said quietly. Then she was gone. I sat there looking at the empty doorway, and I felt another layer of chains fall away. For my whole life, I had been afraid of what would happen if I said no. I had been terrified of their anger, their disapproval, their punishment. And now, I had said no in the biggest way possible. I had built a wall. And what happened? The world didn't end. Instead, two strangers showed me more compassion and understanding than my own family ever had. They had shown me I wasn't crazy. I was just finally safe. The sun was fully up now, casting long golden stripes of light across the floor of the ICU room. The night had been a long, dark tunnel of grief and rage, but the morning brought with it a fragile, tentative sense of peace. After Miss Peterson left, a quiet settled over me. I had drawn my boundary. I had protected my space. Now, all that was left to do was wait and watch over my daughter. I must have dozed off in the chair, my head slumped against the hard plastic back, because I was startled awake by the sound of the doctor's voice. It was the same kind, tired doctor from the night before. He was standing by Sophie's bed, looking at the monitors with an expression I couldn't quite read. My heart immediately started to pound. "What is it?" I asked, jumping to my feet. "Is something wrong?" He turned to me, and for the first time he wasn't wearing a look of cautious concern. He was smiling, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Quite the opposite, Mom," he said. The word Mom from him felt like a badge of honor. "Look at her respiratory monitor. See that? She's initiating her own breaths. She's breathing over the ventilator." I stared at the screen, at the jagged green lines that suddenly seemed like the most beautiful art I had ever seen. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but I understood his smile. It was the smile of good news. "Her intracranial pressure has been stable for hours," he continued, pointing to another screen. "She's responding well to the treatments. We did a quick reflex test a little while ago, and she responded. It was slight, but it was there. My legs felt weak. I gripped the railing of Sophie's bed to keep myself steady. "What does that mean?" I whispered, afraid to let the hope bloom too quickly. "It means she's a fighter," he said, his smile widening. "It means she's starting to come back to us. We're going to keep a close watch. But if she continues on this path, we'll begin the process of taking her off the ventilator tonight." Taking her off the ventilator. The words were a miracle. It meant she could breathe on her own. It meant she was getting better. My legs gave out completely. I didn't fall. I just sort of sank back into the plastic chair, my body suddenly limp with a relief so profound it felt like a physical weight. And then I started to cry. It was a different kind of crying than the night before. This wasn't the ragged, heartbroken sobbing of a terrified mother. It wasn't the quiet, bitter weeping of a betrayed daughter. This was a flood, a tidal wave of every emotion I had held inside for the past day. Fear, anger, grief, and now, an overwhelming, earth-shattering wave of relief and gratitude. I covered my face with my hands and cried harder than I ever had in my entire life. I cried for my daughter's strength. I cried for her pain. I cried for my own survival. The doctor quietly placed a box of tissues on the table beside me and left the room, giving me space. I cried until my body was empty, until all that was left was a deep, shuddering exhaustion and a clear, bright kernel of hope. When I could finally breathe again, I wiped my face and looked at my daughter. The morning light was falling across her face, making her blonde hair look like a halo. The bruise on her cheek seemed a little less dark. Her chest rose and fell in a rhythm that was now partly her own. She was fighting, she was coming back. And in that moment, I felt a shift inside myself. For my entire life, I had felt small. My family had made me small. They had needed me to be small so that their own needs could seem bigger, more important. Even in my anger, I had felt like a small person fighting a giant oppressive force. But looking at my daughter, my miraculous, fighting daughter, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt strong. I had faced the worst night of my life. I had faced the failure of my own family. I had stood up for myself and for my child. and we were both still here. We were both surviving. I leaned over her bed, my heart so full of love it felt like it would burst. I kissed her forehead right next to the bandage. "You're my miracle, Sophie," I whispered, my voice still hoarse from crying. "You are the strongest person I know, and I promise you, right now, I will never let anyone make you feel small. I will never let anyone make you feel unseen the way they did me. Your feelings will always matter. You will always be the most important person in the room." It was a vow, a promise made in the morning light, a promise I knew I would spend the rest of my life keeping. The rest of the day passed in a haze of cautious optimism. Every doctor and nurse who came into the room smiled. The numbers on the machines kept improving. The cold, sterile ICU room began to feel less like a place of fear and more like a place of healing, a place of miracles. That evening, just as they promised, the medical team gathered around Sophie's bed. They began the slow, careful process of weaning her off the ventilator. I stood in the corner, my hands clasped together, my heart pounding with every breath she took on her own. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I had ever witnessed, and she did it. She breathed, deeply and steadily. I spent another night in that plastic chair, but this time I slept. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that comes only after the battle is over. I woke to the soft gray light of a new morning and a feeling that something had changed. The room was quieter. The rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator was gone. The only sound was the soft, steady beep of the heart monitor and the almost imperceptible sound of my daughter's own breathing. I moved to the side of her bed. Her face seemed to have more color in it. Her long eyelashes fluttered against her bruised cheek. I reached out and took her hand. It felt warmer than it had before. And then her eyes opened. They were groggy at first, blinking slowly against the light. They scanned the room, unfocused, until they landed on my face. A flicker of recognition. Her lips, dry and chapped, parted. "Mommy?" The voice was a tiny, raspy croak. It was the weakest sound, and it was the most powerful thing I had ever heard. A sob caught in my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. I squeezed her hand gently, bringing it to my lips. "I'm right here, baby," I choked out, tears streaming down my cheeks again. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Always." She gave the tiniest of smiles, and her eyes drifted shut again. But it was different this time. It was the peaceful sleep of a child who knows she is safe, not the deep unconsciousness of an injured patient. She was back. My Sophie was back. I looked over at the small table next to my chair, at my phone, lying face down. It was silent. It had been silent for nearly 2 days. There were no angry texts, no guilt-tripping phone calls, no demands. There was just peace. The family I had been born into was blocked, powerless, and completely irrelevant. Their drama was a distant noise from a world I no longer lived in. Outside the window, the sun was rising over the hospital parking lot. It wasn't a dramatic, fiery sunrise. It was calm and clear, the light warm and clean as it washed over the world. It felt like a new beginning. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost a family in that hospital. The family I thought I had, the one with the perfect holiday cards and the crushing unspoken rules, had never really been a family at all. It was a performance. It was a cage. What I had done over the last 2 days wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of salvation. I had saved the only family that mattered, the one that was right here in this room, the one made up of a mother and her daughter, bound together by a love that was about protection, not sacrifice. I turned my head slightly, my gaze shifting to look directly into the camera, as if I am speaking to you now, years later, from the peace of my own living room. I ended my story there for a long time, but I know someone out there needs to hear the rest. My voice is soft, steady, and calm. There is no trace of the victim left in it, only strength. If they call you selfish for choosing peace, for building a boundary, for walking away from people who hurt you, even if they share your blood, remember this. It is not selfish to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. It is not selfish to protect your own heart. And it is the most important job you will ever have to protect the heart of your child. It's not selfish to protect love. A small, calm smile touches my lips. It's a smile of deep, earned peace. Like and comment where you're watching from. And please subscribe, because someone out there needs to hear that they're not alone today. And they need to know that it's okay to choose themselves. It's okay to save their own life.